The nervous system is an amazing system that allows all body parts to communicate with each other. Let's go ahead and take a look at the overview of the nervous system before we get into the actual parts. So the nervous system can be divided up into two main parts: the central nervous system, the CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. All right, so we have our brain and we have our spinal cords. All other nerves outside of the brain and spinal cord are part of the peripheral nervous system. Now we can further subdivide the peripheral nervous system into the sensory portion and a motor portion. All right, so again we have our brain and our spinal cord. Information coming from parts of the body to the central nervous system, coming to the brain and the spinal cord, bringing information about whatever, temperature, light, pressure. All that information is coming to the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, and all those are sensory inputs, or part of the sensory nervous system. Once that information is taken by the brain and the spinal cord and processed, information then passes out of the central nervous system along motor pathways, okay, to all parts of the body. Now the sensory nervous system can bring information from all parts of the body except for the viscera, which are the organs. All right, so like the hands and the feet, those travel along pathways that are somatic sensory pathways, okay, bringing information to the central nervous system. Information from the viscera, or the guts, okay, will travel along visceral sensory pathways along the sensory nervous system to the central nervous system. Okay. Now pathways leaving the central nervous system, okay, these are like responses, go out along motor pathways, so the motor nervous system. Now we can divide all those pathways leading away from the central nervous system into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Somatic pathways lead to skeletal muscles, in other words voluntary muscles. All right, we can control it. So those nerves that go to skeletal muscle, voluntary, are along somatic nervous system pathways. Now, if that information goes to along pathways or going to muscles that we don't have control over, that are automatic or involuntary, those pass along the autonomic nervous system, which include the cardiac muscle, smooth muscles, and glands, which all work involuntarily. Okay? Now, the autonomic nervous system, involuntary pathways, can be further subdivided into sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system controls reactions in fight or flight. Okay, if you're scared, stressed out, your reactions and the things you do will be along sympathetic pathways. Rest and digest is the parasympathetic nervous system, and you know, under restful situations and when we're digesting, those are under control of the sympathetic pathways. All right, so that's just an overview. Let's talk about the components of the nervous system. The nervous system is made up of two parts, and these are the neurons, or the nerve cells, and then the support cells called glial cells. So let's talk about the neuron first. I drew it over here. This is a neuron, or a nerve cell. It's composed of a portion here called the cell body, and this is actually the receiving end of the nerve cell. The dendrites here, these little projections here, pick up information, whether it be stimuli or neurotransmitters from another neuron, pick up the information from the environment, and then transmit that message along this long part called the axon. So the axon is the blue part that conducts the messages. Okay. The cell body contains, you know, it's a cell. It has mitochondria, it has endoplasmic reticulum and ribosomes. There's sometimes the gray part, sometimes they call this the gray matter in the brain and the spinal cord, which comprise of the dendrites and cell bodies. It appears gray because there's ribosomes and rough endoplasmic reticulum that gives it its darker color. All right, so information travels along here, the axon. Now, surrounding the axon are specialized cells called glial cells or neuroglia, called the neurolemmacyte or Schwann cell. The neurolemmacyte are cells that wrap around and insulate that axon, and together all the neurolemmacytes are called the myelin sheath. All right. There's spaces between the neurolemmacytes, and these are called neurofibril nodes, or they sometimes called the nodes of Ranvier. And this is what allows the information to pass very quickly along as the electrical impulse travels from node to node. And so this myelin sheath adds for faster conduction. All right, as that action potential, that electrical impulse travels to the ends, and these are called the synaptic knobs. Within the synaptic knobs, the neurotransmitter, the chemical messengers, are located there. And as that electrical impulse reaches the end, it causes the release of these chemicals across the synapse, the space, to either another neuron or a muscle, depending on where this neuron is located, and it causes that electrical impulse to continue on. These projections here are called the teledendria. There, it ends in the synaptic knobs. All right, so that is the neuron. So again, the nervous system is made up of neurons and something called glial cells or neuroglia. Let's go ahead and discuss the different types of glial cells. And these are support cells. Okay, now there are many more glial cells than there are neurons in the nervous system. So these are for support of the nervous system, and they don't actually conduct messages. There are 6 types of glial cells or neuroglia, and we're going to list them here. We have the what's called the astrocytes. The astrocytes are important, and they form part of what's called the blood-brain barrier. Very important barrier within the brain that prevents toxic materials and other things from easily accessing the brain. The next are the ependymal cells. The ependymal cells line chambers and passageways filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and it also helps to make the cerebrospinal fluid. CSF, I'm going to put that there. Microglial cells. Very small cells. These are immune cells in the central nervous system. We have the oligodendrocytes. These provide the myelin. It surrounds the axons of the neurons in the central nervous system. So the myelin or myelinates neurons in the central nervous system. We have the neurolemmacytes. We've already mentioned these. They provide the myelin of neurons in the peripheral nervous system. Myelinates neurons in the peripheral nervous system. So outside of the brain and spinal cord. And the last one, we have the satellite cells. These are support cells. They support in the peripheral nervous system. And specifically within the ganglia in the peripheral nervous system. Okay. Now, ganglia are areas outside of the central nervous system that house the cell bodies and the dendrites. They're called ganglia. So there's these little support cells found there. So astrocytes are found in the central nervous system within the brain. Ependymal cells are in the central nervous system also within the brain, where the CSF is produced, cerebrospinal fluid. Microglial cells, CNS, oligodendrocytes, CNS, and just the neurolemmacytes and the satellite cells are found in the peripheral nervous system. Alrighty, hopefully that was helpful.